When the sexual revolution of the 60s was happening, many people warned against the potential consequences of this complete reversal in values and lifestyles. Most of these warnings were about the consequences the sexual revolution would have on individuals and society at large. But it mostly focused on issues such as happiness, mental health, the integrity of society, family relationships, and things like this. And of course, over the past 60 years, many of these warnings have proven to be true. But an area which was less focused on is the issue of the financial and economic cost that would be inflicted on society and individuals because of the sexual revolution. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. As with every large-scale revolution, the sexual revolution altered many of the key aspects of life in modern society, fundamentally changing how humans live and how they interact with each other. So it's natural that this great change would also have consequences when it comes to the economic situation. So what are these consequences? One of the most direct negative effects of the sexual revolution, an effect which is quite tangible and observable, is the rise of STDs, or sexually transmitted diseases. Most of us know that these are directly the effect of the sexual revolution, because the main cause of their rise is people having sex with multiple people, creating a large web of genitals that have been in direct or indirect contact, as opposed to the traditional lifestyle in which most people would just be paired off and would be in sexual contact with one person for the rest of their lives. So how much did this rise in STDs cost us financially? We know that STDs cost American society $17 billion in medical costs each year. But that's just the direct cost. Because of course, when doctors, laboratories, and producers of medicine have to focus on STDs, it means that they have less time and resources to focus on other diseases. So there's also huge indirect costs as well. Now, at least in America, we could say that to some degree the cost is inflicted on the individuals themselves. But in other Western nations, which were similarly affected by the sexual revolution and its rise in STDs, the healthcare system is to a large degree public, and that means that everyone has to pay the price for the treatment of STDs. And that's not to speak about the many costs for preventative measures that have been put in place to combat STDs. But what are the other areas of the economy that have been affected by the sexual revolution? The most significant impact is the rise of the welfare state. When we look at welfare in the United States, we see that single-parent families are very disproportionately likely to be recipients of welfare, as we can see in this chart. And of course, single-parent families are one of the more well-known and obvious consequences of a sexual revolution, with the rise of both sexual relations outside of marriage, leading to a lot of births outside of marriage, and also the rise in divorce. In this chart, we see that only a few % of welfare recipients are from two-parent families. And we know that research has shown that being a single mother is highly correlated with poverty, controlled for all variables. A woman simply being married to the man she has a child with is going to prevent a lot of poverty. Now, some leftists might see this and say, well, it's because people who are poor are less likely to get married, and thus being a single parent is a symptom of poverty. But when we look at the state of society before the sexual revolution, we see that this really wasn't the case. Sure, poor people and lower income communities were more likely to be single mothers and have illegitimate children, but back then only 4% of births were outside of marriage, compared to today where we have almost half of births which are happening outside of marriage. So yeah, it is clear that if it was simply poverty, the numbers should be going down as poverty went down. But it's actually the opposite, and it was social norms and traditions that prevented these same poor women from falling further into poverty by having a child outside of marriage. And again, when we're talking about the welfare state, we are talking about consequences both for the parties involved and for the common taxpayer. This is the cruelty of the sexual revolution, that in the end everyone should pay the price, even the people who were against it. And you could say, since married couples should pay more taxes, but people who actually upheld sexual morality have a bigger financial burden. Now we know that a lot of this money is coming from taxes, but in the past couple of decades we have seen the social democratic system fall into a spiral of more spending. And because of that, tax money is no longer sufficient to pay for this remaining expenditures of the government. And these governments are issuing more and more debt, which will have disastrous consequences. perhaps the less obvious consequence of the sexual revolution, is the rise in social security spending. Now, social security was not something that was established because of the sexual revolution, but at least in my opinion, it did play a role in facilitating the sexual revolution. The sexual revolution greatly affected the way people use social security. One of the demographic changes of the sexual revolution was greatly reduced birth rates, and there are multiple reasons for this. On one hand, the sexual revolution, in order to make sex out of marriage a feasible option, had to legalize and normalize contraceptives. The pill was one of the main tools that made the sexual revolution possible in the first place. So of course, as contraceptives became more and more prevalent, the natural outcome would be less people having children. On the other hand, feminism told women that they should prioritize careers in their lives, and that they should view children as an obstacle which they should avoid if children are going to negatively affect their careers and their jobs. Women were told to get an education, join the workforce, and only once these steps were accomplished should they think about starting a family. Naturally, this led to more and more women having children later in life, or abandoning it altogether. And well, as we now know, the vast majority of women who ended up childless did so because they lost the opportunity to have children, rather than not wanting children at all. And this is because they would push back marriage until the time when their window of fertility was about to close, and many were left in a situation where they could no longer have children, even if they wanted to. So what does all of this have to do with social security and the economy? After all, women participating in the labour market means that there is actually more people working, so the economy should grow. And the economy did grow for a time. But the collapse of birth rates led to an upside-down population pyramid. And this means that each year that passes, there are fewer and fewer people in the workforce contributing to the economy, and more elderly people that take from the economy. For all the GDP worshippers out there, this means that we're going to have an ever-decreasing GDP per capita. This fact by itself paints a grim future for the economy, but it gets worse when you look at the social security situation. Most Western governments have some form of financial commitment towards the elderly, but as the proportion of elderly people to working age people grows, paying for the expenses of the elderly becomes more and more difficult. A congressional report in the US has predicted that by 2052, about a third of the government's revenue will be spent on social security payments, and that is in addition to the 37% of revenue being spent on interest payments from previous debts. And we know that simply reducing social security commitments will not be an easy task, as just last year France saw many days of violent rioting due to a government plan to slightly raise the age of retirement. So if we take all of these into account, we see a downward spiral for the economy that is leading into poverty, debt, recession, and possibly even collapse. And if societies want to pull themselves out of this spiral, it would require many difficult steps which have to include reversing many of the changes brought on by the sexual revolution. Leave a comment and let us know what you think. Share this video if you liked it, and thank you all for watching. Goodbye.